Hi there, thanks for watching. Okay, in this 13th video, I want to go ahead and kind of finish up the idea of the locus of control, but I want to use the locus of control as a way of introducing what I have come to believe is what's really happening with the cluster B disorders. This is just my theory. I mean, this is just, personal blog. And I'd like to kind of tie up how I see the locus of control and introduce what I feel is a very has been very useful to me as a way of understanding cluster B disorders. And in fact, after decades of therapy, this was the only way that I was able to maybe I would say really I don't well I mean I think I'm still cluster B, but I think that even with my cluster B brain, I think this approach that I want to talk about is the only thing that really helped me get better. I'm not claiming that I'm a great person, but I think I'm a lot more functional and a lot healthier than I used to be. Okay, and believe me, I had a real tough time with NPD and just whatever other cluster B issues that I was dealing with and that other people had to deal with in me. And again, I'm not trying to say that I'm a great person. Obviously, I'm struggling, but I would say that the advancements that I've experienced are probably very similar to people who've had a good experience, let's say in drug addiction recovery. I'm not trying to say these are exactly the same problems, but I think there's a lot of similarities. And I'd like to talk about what I have come to feel is at least for me, a good explanation of the cluster B experience. Okay, so um, basically, to get this started, I just want to kind of tie up the final understanding of the locus of control. And I know that many psychologists will disagree with me and say that locus of control just means whether you have a sense of control being inside of you or outside of you. Okay, I want to give credit to psychology for identifying something important, okay? Because there is something important in a person who will tend to feel that their destiny and their progress is at the mercy of outside forces, okay? When someone has that experience and that attitude, that is a sign that they're very reactive. That a person is probably more reactive than they are non-reactive in life. In other words, a question of balance. And I think psychology is right to point that out. I mean, they're pointing at something. Now, how they process it, how they understand it, I'm not sure I'm convinced. Okay, so I will appreciate them identifying the so-called external locus of control as a real red flag, a kind of a warning sign in people. And I will agree. I will interpret that as that they put their finger on the part of us that's very reactive. Okay, and I think that's a very important observation. But the way I see what they call the alternative, what they're going to try to point to is the internal locus of control. I think that's just kind of a naive contrariness where they want to try to naively find what they think is the opposite, of having an external locus of control. So then they say internal locus of control. I don't think it's quite like that. I think it's better to say that the external locus of control is a high expression of the reactive self. Okay, but to me the opposite is not just say, oh, external internal. No, understand that the external locus of control is a sign of being very reactive. Okay, so then what they call the internal locus of control would be the opposite, not of the inside outside, but the opposite of being reactive. Okay, and or the contrary of what it would mean to be a reactive person. So what would be the alternative? Okay, and this is where I'm going to talk about what worked for me. Okay, and again, I'm not trying to say that I'm like the world's record or that I'm doing so great, but it helped a lot. Okay, so this really helped a lot. And so I think that the best place to understand what I think they're pointing at with the alternative to the external locus of control is what I've seen in the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. Okay, Now that's kind of, people don't have to go read Heidegger. I mean, I'll just summarize, because he came up with a concept, in the early 20th century, inspired by, his understanding of Greek philosophy, which was pretty interesting. The Greek philosophers, at least some of them, were really concerned with being itself, being itself. I mean, that's kind of interesting to, what does it mean for something to be, and then to say being? Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I mean, that's kind of like existence itself. And when you think like that, I mean, that almost gets into sort of like, I would almost say almost like a psychedelic. I mean, it's kind of like, whoa, really, really abstracted. But on the other hand, I think, and maybe not everybody can relate to this. I mean, I'm not going to pretend this is for everybody, but at least in my case, I thought it was really fascinating how Heidegger really seized on this idea, and it was just an idea he had. I mean, I don't know if it's really true, but he had this idea of sort of like a pre-linguistic, um, sort of a non-linguistic precognitive, um, sort of a non-linguistic precognitive awareness that's in the person, that's in a person. So it's kind of like below language and below cognition, which is actually, who knows if that's really true. The idea was something like that there's something very fundamental in us that is sort of resonating with being itself. Sort of like there's something in us already that's kind of like the just being, you know. It's kind of interesting. And I can just say from my experience that I'm not sure what he really meant by that, because I mean he was trying to say that it was sort of like our access to being itself, and it's kind of almost like a religious kind of thing, or at least I think it could be interpreted that way. But I think in my case, I mean, I think there is a part of me, and I think hopefully a part of a lot of people, where there is a part of us that's just sort of humming with the being of being, just the existence of existence, just pure being. It's just sort of like, time and the lights are on and just being. It's kind of, you know, but then the immediate question is, well, how is that important? Okay, because I'm a pretty practical person, and I don't go for a lot of fancy, just kind of mumbo jumbo, or just you know just being esoteric for the sake of being esoteric. To me, even Buddhism to me kind of turns me off a little bit. I find it a little bit fundamentalist and kind of a little bit of a fetish, and just really just another religion. So going to this idea of what Heidegger, he calls it Dasein, and Dasein is basically the part of us that kind of resonates with being sort of a precognitively. And of course, I'm going to let go of the word precognitive. I don't know what that, I'm not sure. I'll never understand what that means, because pre-linguistic, whatever. But there is in my experience a part of me that does kind of resonate just with being, just being. And it's just a part of me. I mean, I'm not, I don't think there's any need to get overly invested, but just to understand that there is a part of us that just kind of buzzes with the being of being, just existence per se. And that, why is that important? Okay, so I mean, Heidegger says that it's our access to whatever, to being itself, whatever. I'm not going to pretend what it's access to, but I do think that it does kind of give us a sense of just being per se, just being itself. And why is that important? I think that's important because I think that the part of us that's just in tune, just with being itself, that part of us is probably the part of us that observes experience just as it happens, just phenomena as they are. And it's kind of like, I guess, for me, if there's one thing that I resonate personally with, and I think could be helpful as like a gateway to like maybe some kind of like personal therapy or self-improvement, is what I call what is called phenomenology. And it's Heidegger is a philosopher who was part of that school, and there are different positions in phenomenology, but at least borrowing from Heidegger's conception of the so-called Dasein, the part of us that's just kind of in the mode of being, a part of us, just a part of us. I think, for me, even the concept phenomenology, that is to me a very important entry point, to get into, how we can do something, and I'm talking about something practical, so starting with this sort of just this part of us that's sort of able just to, be in tune with just being itself. And I'm not talking about meditation. That's interesting. Meditation to me is not a well-defined term, and I think the common popular understanding of what meditation means, concentrate on breathing, stillness, to me that's just kind of just exercise. I think you don't have to be. I don't have to be like in a special meditation just to be sort of aware of a baseline resonance with being. That's just, or maybe, call it meditation if you want, but I don't think of it as meditation. I just think of it as a part of me, a part of anybody, you know. But what's the importance of this? I think if we can get in touch with the part of us, just the part of us that's sort of in tune just with being itself, I think that does awaken or brings more out the part of us that's just kind of watching and doesn't have any investment, expectation, anticipation, reaction. And it's really important because there's so much of us that does anticipate, that does have expectation. Why not add another soundtrack? You know what I mean? Or if it's already there at the bottom of the soundtrack, why not bring it out a little more as a balancing to the part of us that's already so anticipatory, so expectational, the part of us that's invested in outcomes and fears and everything. I mean, so much of me, I can tell you honestly, so much of me is very anxious, is very concerned about outcomes, is very attached to how things are going to turn out. What's the best way to live? What's the best recipe for the world? So much of me is like that. Why not have another part that can add some space, and add a little bit of contrast? And maybe if we can express more the sort of the underlying sort of just the being, that will add kind of like a resonance that will allow us to kind of unfold. You know what I mean? Sort of unfolding. Because otherwise, if we don't have that resonance of being, we can sort of collapse down into just a sort of a fused, a fused collapsing of our consciousness, so that we're not unfolded into think of it as like the flower. The flower opens up. Maybe the human, if we're really healthy, will sort of be opened up. Okay, and that space, I think, is given by parallel simultaneous resonances or simultaneous processes. You know what I mean? So in other words, the idea is not, oh, I'm going to stop being so emotional, I'm going to stop being so invested, so interested, and I'm going to start being, no, it's not one or the other. It's more like we can keep being just as emotional as we've always been, but we just add another layer that gives us that space to sort of open up, where we can have our emotions but also have space. And in that space, there's room for deliberation. It gives us room to sort of reflect. It gives us room to do all the operations that when we're collapsed, we're just collapsed into just instant reaction. So in other words, this is a way to kind of build up the part of us that's non-reactive. Okay. In other words, the space is what allows us room to be not just reactive. Okay. So I think this is really important, kind of to see how I've come to understand the cluster B phenomenon, which is, I think, a collapsed personality. Really, is what it is, because we just sort of collapse and fuse into just a pure reactive self, because there is no space. And this is just a way, at least for people who don't naturally have the space, maybe to artificially, or maybe we're discovering things that healthy people learn subconsciously. I don't know. I'm not going to answer that. But at least it gives us a tool to develop the space that we didn't have. Okay, so that's what I consider, I'm calling that the phenomenological theory and approach to what is the cluster B and what can we do about it. So Anyway, the next video I'll talk more about it, but thanks a lot for watching.